My name is Joe Brady. I am the Webinar Marketing Manager. I'm also a photographer. I own Dragonfly Studio. I also do workshops around the country. And if any of you would like to consider joining me on any of those, or if you would like to get some more recordings, what I'm going to probably do is I still have too much stuff to present to you today, just like I did with my landscape ones last week. So I'm going to record those on my own, and if you guys would send me an email when they are done, I'll let you know where you can get them. Now, I am kind of a guest speaker today. Even though I'm the webinar manager here at the Mac Group, I'm acting as a guest speaker. What I'm here to present to you today is my take on portrait editing. I've been doing this for a long time. I've worked in an ad agency for about 8 years, doing a lot of retouching. I owned a digital service bureau, and now I teach photographic techniques to pro photographers. So I've had a lot of experience with this. I've had the great fortune of having a lot of good friends who are real serious Photoshop pros, and we all share from each other. And just like anything else in Photoshop, there are 20 ways to accomplish the same thing. I'm going to show you the ways that I've figured out that work well for me in my workflow. So you, of course, may have some you like. You may see some things I do and decide you don't like to do that, and you might see some things and ask yourself, man, I wish I would have known that 5 years ago. So let's get right into it. Again, just a quick look at my primary toolbox. The color management stuff, again, which I'm not going to talk about today, that I use: the Color Monkey Photo, the i1 Display 2, and the Color Checker Passport. Those three tools allow me to get my color workflow under control, and that means I get prints wherever I send them, whether it be out to my lab, having books done with blurb, or if I do them on my own printers, they come back the first time looking just like I see on my screen. And that's the goal. What I use for capture, I use the Color Checker Passport, which you see here. By the way, if you guys, as a tease, again, for you guys at the end, I'm going to be giving away 2 Color Checker Passports at the end of the presentation, so stay tuned and good luck to you on that. And also for you, those of you that ask, yes, that guitar was my Ibanez, but my wife is a Taylor player, and I also have a Washburn, so that's my other passion. So we want to get color straight right from the get-go. I do a custom white balance, especially if I'm in studio shooting. There's no excuse for not doing a custom white balance, because then it's dialed right in. You've got it set perfectly. Then I will create a custom camera profile. And what a camera profile does is it takes us a leap above just having a white balance reference, and I can get all the colors back. Now, I'm not going to talk about this today. However, if you again check the webinars I've got again coming up in January, one called Beyond Monitor Calibration, where I go through monitor calibration in detail, as well as soft proofing in Photoshop. And then the other one is called Raw Color Power with the Color Checker Passport, where I go in detail about creating profiles, camera profiles in both Lightroom and Photoshop. So again, I'm not going to talk about that today, but you might want to check in if you haven't seen those already. And of course, what you need to do before you start anything, whatever software you're doing, whether it be Photoshop or Lightroom or Aperture or something else, you got to make sure your monitor's calibrated. It's your window. It's where all your decisions are being made. And I've said this before, but it may not be obvious to some of you. Your monitor is the one piece of equipment that has the single biggest effect on how your prints come out, because that's where you're making your color editing decisions. So you got to have it right, because if you don't, you're starting from the wrong starting point, and you're going to be disappointed in the color. And lastly, again, you don't get to set this on the monitor. You need hardware and software to do this, but you've got to get your monitor luminance under control. For those of you that are watching this right now, I don't know how many of you are actually calibrating. If this image on the right looks well exposed, your monitor is set way too bright. That is way dark on my calibrated system. Get your monitor calibrated, get your brightness under control, and then you're going to get prints back that look like they did on your monitor. People always ask for that. These are the starting settings. I'm not going to go into these today. I'm not going to debate them with you. These are the standard accepted settings. Monitor brightness between 80 and 120. Color temperature of 6500K and a gamma of 2.2. And this applies to everybody. So if you want to debate this or want to learn more about it, join me in the monitor calibration webinars. Now, for those of us going out to a lab and not doing our own printing, I use a device like the i1 Display you see here, and basically what the software does is sends up known colors. the device reads them in, and from that creates the calibration profile, which is basically a set of corrections. Automatically saved, automatically put in place, and then you're good to go. Then you know your monitor is set correctly. So use something. I don't care what you use, but use some kind of monitor device, a monitor calibration device. You can't do this stuff by eye. Check out xwritephoto.com. These are the 3 devices. I actually use all 3 of these. Take a look at it if you're not doing it. Okay, time to get into Photoshop. I blew through that because I wanted to get through the preliminaries so we can get to some photo editing, because I ran out of time last time. That's why I decided to kind of do this as session 2. So we're going to go right into Photoshop, and I even sped things up by even having an image already open, ready to go. So, lovely portrait right out of the camera. One light. This was actually shot with the new Pocket Wizards with one light off to the side. And alright, so now we need to do a little bit of retouching. We want to make this, take it from nice to something that's got great impact to it. And the first thing I'll typically do is work on a copy of my base layer to do my retouches. So let's do that first. Now, there's a couple of softwares I use all the time for my portrait editing to go along with Photoshop, and they are a couple of softwares from Topaz, most notably Topaz Adjust. I also use Topaz Simplify. And then from Nik, I use Color Effects, I use Veza, and I use Silver Effects. And I'm going to show you one thing for our wedding portrait business. There's a plugin in Color Effects that we use all the time, because what it allows you to do is to set up a batch command to batch soften skin, and everybody benefits from that. So let's do that first. So what I'm going to do is duplicate the background layer, and I can do that by either, by either dragging to the folded page or hitting Command or Control J on a PC, and I get my background copy. So let's run that first through the Nik filter. Actually, Nik already automatically creates a new layer, so I did not need to do that step, but we'll go ahead and let it run. So I'm using Nik Color Effects here. Whoops, let's zoom out here. Okay, now under, they're grouped here, and you see under Portrait, Dynamic Skin Softener is the one I'm after. And what you do is simply take the eyedropper and pick on something that is skin. Now if I then zoom in, I could drag this slider left and right where it shows the before and after. Look what it's done for the skin. Look how it's smoothed and softened and added a slight glow to that skin. And I can change how much of this happens by changing the details over on the right. Now this is not a full-blown Nik demo day, but one of the cool things about this is I can do this as a batch, because if I'm doing the same person, their skin color isn't going to change much. In fact, I can even bring down the color reach a little bit, because I see it's gotten a little bit of her hair, because she's a blonde hair. So I would set this up once, and I can include this in an action and take an entire batch of images and have the skin smooth in each of those. Now this little spot right here, I will work on that after the fact. Let's just go ahead and apply that. So what the software automatically does is we'll then go ahead and apply that softening to the skin, and that quick. And again, since it's a plugin, you can assign this to a batch. So there we see before and after. Let's zoom in a bit on the face. Again, before and after. Now it's on a layer, so if I decide it's a little heavy, I can bring down the opacity. And if I decide I really don't want it to affect her hair, if I turn this on and off, I'm seeing a slight bit of softening on the hair over here. What I could do is add a mask. I'll do that by just clicking right here, bringing up a brush. Now this is one technique that everybody asks me. Resizing your brush. Now in the past what we all did was we used the left bracket to make it smaller, the right bracket key to make it bigger, or we'd come up to the brush window here and we'd adjust the size and the hardness of the edge. No more of that. What we're going to do instead is hold down Control Option, or on a PC I believe it's Command Alt. And if you drag left and right, that changes the size of your brush. If you drag up and down, it changes the hardness of the edge. It is one of the greatest time savers I have ever been shown. My friend Eddie Tapp showed me that. So for you PC guys, I'm not a PC person, sorry. What is the keyboard command that matches Control Option on a Mac? So you guys can let me know about that. So again, click, drag right with Control Option held down, drag left to make it smaller, up for softer, down for harder edge. That's as simple as it is to do. Alright, I didn't want to actually fill that in. Okay, so if I decided I wanted to bring that back down, I can just give myself a smaller brush. And if I want to change the opacity, 3 ways to do it. You can click on the slider and drag it left and right. You can also click on the word opacity. Anything that's got a slider box also has this finger adjustment, and as I drag it left or right over top of the word, you can see the numbers changing. Or my favorite way is I typically deal in increments of 10. So if I knew I wanted to bring this back and say I wanted to work at 40%, I just hit the number 4 on my keyboard, and that gives me 40%. And each of the 10s will do that. 7 gives you 70%, 0 gives you 100%. So I'm going to type with a black brush. I'm going to hit X to put black in the foreground, just to bring back the sharpness of that. Okay. Good. So now what we've done is, all we did is we just softened the skin. Now I want to retouch some of the highlights. Now, as far as the order of this goes, some people like to, everybody has their own order. Sometimes I think of doing things after the fact. I generally have a workflow, but sometimes I look at the image and see where it takes me. So in order to fix these bright spots, there's a couple of different techniques we can use. What I'm going to do before I do that is I'm going to create a stack. I'm going to flatten what we've got so far. So we've got this one image that's at 60% opacity and our background. So I'm going to take these 2 visible layers. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and click on the flyout menu. Then I'm going to drag down and click on Merge Visible. Now holding down the Alt or Option key while I do this gives me a flattened version of the image but kept all my layers. If I didn't hold down Alt or Option and chose that Merge Visible, it would have flattened those 2 layers into one. And there's advantages to having these having these preserved, as you'll see later. So I want to go try the Stamp tool. So I just hit the letter S, or I can click on the Stamp tool. And I'm going to come over here and again give myself a little bit bigger brush. And I've got these areas that are lighter, obviously. So what I'm going to ask my stamp brush to do is to only darken areas that are lighter than where I sample from. So by changing this blending mode up here to darken, if I then sample by holding down Alt or Option, say from here, and I'm painting at 50%, if I then start painting in here, it only darkens. Now I got areas that I didn't want. So let me do that again. So I'll just darken a bit, and I'll resample, and I'll come over here. Now this is a little rough, but that's okay. Let's go down a little lower opacity, because we're going to soften the effect of this by doing it by bringing the opacity down. Same thing here. I just start painting with the opacity turned down. Again, this is one way of doing this. I'm going to show you another one in just a minute. A little bit bigger brush. Now I've got a straight line here across the bridge of her nose, so I'm going to click once, hold down the Shift key at the end, and click again, and it draws a straight line. Now this is kind of rough. You're seeing this in here. You're actually seeing these edges. What I'm just going to simply do is bring the opacity down a bit, and they disappear. So about 60%. So what it has the effect of doing is lightening up the image. And you can adjust the opacity to flavor. Now another thing I like to do to most of my skin tones is to run a different kind of smoothing on skin. And once again, I'm going to do a stack and hold down Alt and Option and Merge Visible. And I'm going to run a filter in Photoshop under Blur called Surface Blur. And it's going to be pretty extreme. It's going to turn her into a Barbie doll. That's okay. We're just going to leave it there. and let that apply. Now I'm going to mask that back in. Kind of by itself, it's kind of an interesting look. It's very glowy. If that's the kind of look you were going for, then you could by all means use that. But I want something a little more realistic. So I'm going to apply a mask to this. And to do that, I would normally just click on the mask. However, I just want to paint in on the skin, on the face mostly, maybe a little bit on the arms. I don't want this to be applied to the background. So if I hold down Alt or Option as I click on the mask, it fills in the mask with a black background. Whoops, hold on a second. I'm doing, by the way, I'm presenting to you guys today on my my MacBook. I'm actually using my trackpad rather than my Wacom tablet, so occasionally if I lean against it, it does things without me wanting it to. So again, I hold down Alt or Option, click on the mask, and I get a black mask, which in essence hides that blur that we just did. Then I'll come into the face, and just real quickly, I'll put white in the foreground, get my brush, and I'm going to work at about 40%, and I'm just going to paint in my mask, and what that will do is allow that blur to come through. Actually, I'm going to go even higher. I'm going to go to 70%. Whoop, I did my stack without my blur. Hold on a second here. I forgot to do the blur to this. I had deleted that. Sorry, so let's do that blur again. So here the blur is being applied. Yes, I will show that merge visible layers again after the fact. I'll show you that in a second. Okay, so then there's our blur. There's our mask filled with black. Now as I start to paint with white in the foreground, it's starting to let that blur come through and only where I paint. And you can see it also has the effect of softening the highlights a little bit. And you can decide how much of this you want to bring back. Now sometimes I will overdo a little bit to make sure I get everywhere, because again the beauty of this is it's on a layer and I can always bring it back by bringing the opacity of the layer down. One of the things that this really has a nice effect on, if you're photographing somebody and it's a little cold out, or they have a tan that's not even, and they've got some maybe some goosebumps, it will smooth that out as well. So if I drag around here, you can see just as I paint over top of this, and this is a real quick effect. Again, I'm using this with my trackpad, but let's take a look and see where this got us from before and after. Just what we've been doing in the past couple minutes. We've gone from here to there. So look at the difference already. We're in a good place with this one. All right, so let's go back to full screen. And I decided the background to me is a little bit distracting. It's a little bit too light. I want to make it be a little bit darker. So I'm going to do a levels adjustment. Bring up the levels command here, and I'm going to bring the levels down. Now you guys are probably familiar, if you drag left it makes the levels, it makes it lighter. If you drag down it makes it darker. There's another way of doing this, however. If I want the light areas to go down as well, because here's the problem. If I make this darker, this area here behind her head does not really get lighter. It doesn't work on highlights. So rather than drag the mid slider, I'm going to drag the output levels down here. So I'm going to drag the white slider in here, and what this does is it basically overall darkens the entire image and doesn't have any effect on the color. Now it affected her as well, but I didn't care about that. What I was looking for was back here, because then I'll simply bring up my brush tool again. Now this time we have a white mask, so to mask out the effect we use black. I'll put black in the foreground, just give myself a big brush. And again, for those of you that joined late to do this, I'm holding down Control Alt. As soon as I have my brush in the image, as soon as I click, hold down those two keys and click, it makes it turn red. And as I drag left and right, it makes it bigger and smaller. And as I drag up and down, it makes the edge hardness change. Alright, so I got black here. I'm going to work at about 60% because I want to bring her back and leave the background darker. And again, that quickly, look what we've done. We went from here to here. We were able to darken the background. Now I missed some of her arm over here, so let's just go ahead and add into that. You can also even do some light shaping this way. Alright, so again, that quickly we went from there to there. Now I'm going to take it one step further. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Oop, I accidentally hit the brush there. I'm going to zoom out. What I want to do is add a little bit of more vignette and light painting into this. And to do that, I'm going to create an overlay burning and dodging layer. So let's create a new blank layer. I do that by just clicking right there. It says create a new layer. And I'm going to change its blending mode from normal to overlay. Then I'm going to fill it. I'm going to go to edit, fill, and I'm going to fill it with 50% gray. And watch, nothing happens. Even though this is now a gray layer, nothing happened to the image. Because the way overlay works is anything on that layer that is lighter than 50% gray will lighten the image. Anything that is darker than 50% gray will darken the image. Oh, by the way, for some of you, if you're having trouble with that keyboard command and it's not working, this is fully functional only in CS5, and that's what I'm working in today. I got rid of all my CS4 copies. I believe the left and right worked to make it bigger and smaller, but the soften part did not work. And before CS4, I don't believe that works at all. So this is a CS5 thing. So we've got our overlay layer. And you see if I change it to normal, it's just a gray layer. If I change it to overlay, it becomes transparent. Now again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint dark where I want the image to darken and paint a little lighter where I want it to be lighter. So I'm going to get my brush. What I want to do is I'm going to darken around this area here. I want you really to zoom in and really be focused on her face. So I want to darken out some more of these areas selectively. So I'll get my brush, put black in the foreground, and typically when I'm doing this I only work at about 10% opacity. So I hit the number 1, and let me again shrink this because I want to be able to get to the edge as well, because I want to give myself a nice big brush. And I'm just going to paint with black on this layer. And again, the beauty of this is it's cumulative. The other beauty of this is if you mess up, you can paint with gray, with 50% gray, and it just is like it never happened. Now this, as I mentioned, this works with both sharpening, or I'm sorry, with darkening and lightening. So if I want to add a little more light to this side of her face, I can just switch to white by hitting X, bring my brush up. I'll make it a little smaller this time, but a very soft edge. Again at 10%, I'll paint with a little bit of white here. I'm also going to paint on the foreground of her arm a little, and I'm going to lighten up her hair. Look at this, ladies. You can have your highlights done digitally, and I'm going to make it 20% so you can really see it. Probably too much for reality, but just to let you see what happens. Okay, so again, that quickly, just that one little layer, we went from there to there. Look at how the focus of the image has changed. Now you're really focused in on the portrait and not on what was going on behind her. And again, if I change this to normal, you can see that's what we just did. That little bit of lightening and darkening. Now, if you think the transitions get a little bit hard, when you do this effect, you also have the option of blurring this layer. So I'll just go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and let's just apply a blur. 50 is probably too much. And we'll do about 10 pixels. Hit OK, and what that did was it softened the transitions between these light and darks I just did. And I'll change it back to overlay, and there we go. And let's just go full screen for a second so we can see this. And we end up with a really nice portrait where we started here, and now we just ended up there that quickly. Pretty cool stuff. Alright, so let's be done with our friend Paula here. And let's go into somebody else. Hope we'll get rid of, didn't want to go into PowerPoint again. Hold on a second. Let's go into Bridge. And let's do something a little more freaky. I'm going to add a little more edginess here. So let me open these two images. One of these is a RAW file, so it's going to open up in Adobe Camera Raw. And Adobe Camera Raw is where we apply our camera profiles. Oh, and by the way, someone asked a good question. Does overlay cause any color shifting when you do your burning and dodging? And the answer is typically no, unless you do really extreme. Then you may see some of it. All right, so I've got my highlight and shadow warnings on here, and I can see they've got a lot of extra black. So first thing I'll do is I'll turn down the black so that I'm not adding any extra to it. And I don't have any highlight warnings, so that is safe. Now I can decide, or do I want to do any overlays or recoveries? I can bring the recovery down. There is nothing. I'll add a little bit of fill light just to lighten it up a smidge. And this was shot at ISO 400, so I might have a little bit of noise. So let's take a look. So I click on the noise panel, and I'm going to zoom in to about 100% so I can really see what's going on. Let's just cut to the chase here and see if we see any noise. Not really seeing a lot even at ISO 400. This was shot with a Canon 5D Mark II. You can see at 400 ISO, it's pretty noise free. So really no reason to do any noise reduction on this image. So I will leave that alone. However, I do sharpening in here sometimes. Let's go back and look here. And you should do this at 100% if you really want to see the effect. Oops, I went too far. Here's 100%. I'm going to apply some sharpening. And again, I'll do my skin softening effects when I am in Photoshop. So my favorite sharpening numbers for Adobe Camera Raw are somewhere between 70 and 80. And I will bring the radius down under 1. And as I drag this over a bit, let's look at this kind of fancy gun here. This was from a shoot where the subject was called steampunk. It was something new to me. Maybe you guys are familiar with it. So that adds a nice bit of sharpening. And again, we're not getting any noise. If I would bring this luminance noise reduction up. And these settings probably to about there. All right, let's fit that to view. Now, another thing. This is something new to Adobe Camera Raw for CS5 as well as Lightroom 3. And that's the ability to have lens profiles. Now, wide-angle lenses have a tendency to both distort and vignette a little bit on the edges. Watch what happens when I turn the profile off. You can see the image is going through a slight bit of distortion from the lens, and this corrects for it. And the software checks to see what camera and lens shot the image. So if you've got a Canon or a Nikon, they're all pretty much built in there. So I'll leave that in. And then the camera profile. Now here's the Adobe standard profile. This is the standard conversion for colors that you're provided with. It always sacrifices a little bit of color, particularly if you've got an image with a lot of blues in it. By dialing in the profile, I'm not going to go over the creation part of this today, but just to suffice, let me just bring up my profile. Here's my 5D daylight profile. And I don't know how well you're seeing it on your screen, but there is a color shift because I was losing some of the colors from the standard conversion. By having a custom profile for my camera, I'm able to get everything. Okay, so the last thing is I have to decide my workflow down here. Now, where is this image going? If I'm sending this out to my lab, and that's how I'm creating it, I might just go straight to sRGB. If I might print it on my own printer, I'll typically use Adobe RGB. If I'm going to do some real serious editing and maybe do a fine art print, then I may go to ProPhoto RGB. Again, the color workflow, color options, a subject for another day. But let's go ahead, just for speed's sake, and I'm going to shrink it down. Because the other option is, here's the full resolution file, 21 megapixels. I don't need that for demonstrations, so we're going to size it down to 6 megapixel. I will leave it on 16-bit though, because I'm going to run this through both Nik and Topaz filters. And if you're going to use third-party filters like that, they're pretty intense, so they really need that extra bit depth. Okay, so Adobe RGB, 16-bit, 6 megapixel. I'll click on OK and go ahead and open this image. Now I've already got a version here open. What I decided after I opened it was I felt that it looked better with a different kind of cropping. I liked kind of the square cropping for this image. So let's just let this open because I want to show you something else new in CS5 here. Alright, so here's our image. Hit the F key to go to full screen. Now I'm going to bring up the crop tool and I'm going to hold down shift because that's going to give me a square. And I kind of like this as a square image. So I hold down the Shift key, that constrains it to a square. And one of the new options is you have your crop overlay default as a rule of thirds. Now I don't necessarily want an exact rule of thirds here. Like I don't necessarily need to put it on her eye. I'm going to have her be a little bit high because I want to get the gun in there, and then I'm going to hit OK. And I might even go a little smaller, even a little tighter. Oop, I forgot to hold down my Shift key. Again, Shift will constrain it to a square. Okay, better. Now, if you guys remember that surface blur tool, I will get to that. That's how I'm going to do the retouching here. She's got pretty good makeup on. It's very smooth. So I'm not going to really need to do any blemish retouching either. She has very smooth skin. So let's go ahead and do the surface blur. So Command J or Control J to duplicate the layer. Filter, blur, surface blur. And let's just get her face done. Let's see what that does to her face. Using the same settings we had before, the 1725. Yep, that looks pretty good. And again, it's overly done here. It does kind of create almost like a painting effect. So again, you know, you can be creative and use this there as well. Let's just let this run. Let me just check some questions here. By the way, keep the questions here. Keep the questions coming. Love them. As a note about resolution, as they come up, somebody asked why resolution at 240 instead of higher like 300. Depends where you're going. Everybody's hung up on 300 because that's what a lot of printers ask for, because it gives them a lot of wiggle room. Do you need 300? In most cases, no. I found that continuous tone images, actually for inkjet printers, 200 is considered the default, not 300. It's plenty of resolution. And if you're going out to an inkjet print, if you're going out to a canvas print, 180 is plenty. It's not going to look any different, and the file sizes start to get really big. So 240 is what I generally default to for my sizes. And someone asked, does the NIX software, that softening software we showed before, work on someone that has really major skin pores? You can change how much that software affects the skin. You can change how much detail is maintained. There's detail sliders for small details, medium details, and big details, and you can play with it. For somebody that has that I really want to get rid of the pores, I prefer to use this surface blur. So we just blurred the entire image. I want to put in my black mask and just bring back her face. So again, I hold down Alt or Option with the layer selected, click on the mask, and again, as long as I'm holding down Alt or Option, I get a black filled mask. And then I just want to zoom in on her face. And I'm going to get my brush, and I'm going to paint at 50%. And I'm just going to paint with white over her face, and that will allow that surface blur that we just did to come through. Now again, she's got really, really smooth skin, so it doesn't need all that much. And almost done. So again, that quickly, we've got her face smoothed out. And let's take a look at the before and after. So again, we went from there to there that quickly. Just a smooth, subtle, because we were painting at 50%. We can take a look at the mask to see what we did. And if I decide I want to refine it, I can come in on the mask, make sure I didn't miss any spots, like there are any holes. And I can actually do this painting right on the mask. And I got the mask brought up by simply clicking on the mask icon itself and holding down the Alt key or Option. So, okay, so now I can click back on the icon, and I get my image back, and I can turn it on and off, and we see the smoothing effect it had. Very cool. Now we're going to do something a little more funky to this image. All right, so we've got her face good. Now we're going to add a real extra to it. I love doing this with portraits, particularly with clothing and objects, and then masking the face back in. And that's one of my absolute favorite plugins. It's called Topaz Adjust. Now, Topaz does not automatically create a new layer for you, so I need to do that stacking trick. So I'll hold down Alt or Option, click on Merge Visible to get my flattened image. Now, the other advantage of doing that rather than flattening it is I still have this mask, because I'm going to want that mask back in a minute. Just stay tuned. So I'm going to run it through Topaz. So I click on my layer, go to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Adjust 4 is what I want. Oh, by the way, I'll have a discount coupon for you, coupon code for all the Topaz and Nix softwares for you guys also at the end of the presentation. So Topaz has got a lot of cool stuff in the new version. Simple things like exposure correction. You just click on it and you can see what it will do. You can add a little pop. I use this one a lot. If you're just going for a subtle, look at what that does to the image before and after. And you can go crazy with it, and which is what we're going to do, because this is a kind of a crazy image. And my favorite crazy is Spiceify. And look what that does. Now it does really cool stuff to the rest of the image and makes her face kind of freaky. So we don't want it to be that freaky. But I like what it's done everywhere else. So I'm going to click on OK and let that process that Spiceify command. This works great on landscapes, by the way, too. Most people don't use this for portraits because they think it's just too crazy. Well, I want to bring her face back. Remember we had this mask where we already masked her face back in for the glow? If I hold down Alt or Option and click on this mask and then drag it to the new layer, it adds it to that layer. Now it gave me the inverse. See, we have just her face got the Spiceify because there's the mask. What I want is the inverse of that. So I just click on the mask and hit Command or Control I, which will invert it. It gives me a negative of the mask. So now I get her face back, but her eyes and lips still have the Spiceify. If I don't like that, I can just click on my mask and put a black brush there and just go ahead and bring that back. I kind of like what it did to her eyes, though. Let's zoom in on that. Yeah, that's kind of freaky, but it might be a little too much. So let me just paint it back in. Let me paint it about 30%. So I'll just take a little bit off of that. Okay. So wonderful, very cool stuff. So again, that quickly, we went from there to there. It's a great effect. Now the last thing I'm going to do to this particular image. Oh, and this copy mask feature that I just did, yeah, it works on, well, I think pretty much every CS. Pretty much every CS Photoshop will do that alt drag of the mask. So I'm going to create a new blank layer, change it to overlay. Now I'm not going to fill it with gray this time. The filling with gray part is mostly so you can see what you've done. It has no effect on the image. So if you just leave it blank, it's fine. Just that if you paint with white, you really can't see what you're doing. But not that big a deal. So again, I want to darken this background off to one side. Just shape the light a little bit so you're focusing a little maybe more on the center of the image, maybe the face and this kind of Jules Vernish looking gun. So I'm going to get my black brush, make it really big, and I'm going to zoom out so I can get right to the edges more easily. And I'm going to start, whoops, that was with white. Put black in the foreground, and yes. Now, downside. When I did this, it added a little color to that part of her blouse. Did you notice that? So this is not the technique to use for that white. So I'm just going to do everywhere but there for a second. And then I'm going to use the other technique that we looked at a minute ago, and that was using a levels. So I'm going to do a levels adjustment. And I'm going to bring the output levels down again. So again, all I'm looking at right now is this area, this piece of her blouse. I don't care about the rest of the image. So I'm going to just bring the levels down so that gets darkened a little bit. And then I'm going to fill this mask. See, the levels adjustment already comes with a mask. So I'm going to fill this with black. I can do that easily if with black in the foreground, click on the mask and hit Option or Alt Delete. That fills with the foreground. And then with a white brush, make that a little smaller. With a white brush, I will start painting over here to darken up this white. This is how you actually can darken whites. You cannot burn and dodge whites any other way. There we go. All right, subtle, but you can see it's just darkened it a little bit. And what it did was, again, it kept from taking focus away from her face, and we've got a pretty cool portrait going on here. Now I'm going to show you one more really cool thing in here. Oh, two more actually. I'm going to stack this one more time. Alt or Option, Merge Visible. So now again I have my stack here, and I'm going to run 2 more filters through it. I'm going to add a little bit, I'm going to try 2 different things. First, I'm going to add a glow. And this is my favorite way of adding a glow to kind of a soft portrait. It kind of is similar to the surface blur, but if any of you guys ever used to shoot film, and if you ever put like a gauze or nylons in front of your lens to get that kind of soft glowy effect, this will kind of duplicate that. And what you do is, built into Photoshop, under Filter, Other, is a filter called High Pass. And again, for those of you that ask where was Spicify, you got to buy that one. Spicify comes from Topaz Labs. If you go to topazlabs.com, you can see it there. In fact, you can download it as a free trial for 30 days. I guarantee once you start using Spicify, you will wonder how you lived without it. And again, stay tuned. I'll give you a discount code for it. So the default number for high pass, if you've never used it before, is 10. If I want a big glow, I'll typically go between 15 and 20 pixels. I'm going to do 20 so you can really see the effect. Now you see it gives us this kind of embossed effect, and what we need to do is change the blending mode. So if I change it from normal to overlay, by itself what it does is do an incredible extra sharpening. Now if you're looking for that, you could be done. That's a really cool look, but I was after a glow for this. I want to actually soften up parts of the image, and it's very easy to do. You just run your overlay like we just did, except now you invert the overlay. So let's go look at it under normal again. So I want the inverse of this. I don't want the positive, I want the negative. Now remember, this positive effect when we changed it to overlay greatly sharpened the image. If I hit Command-I, Control-I, I get the negative, the inverse of that. Now watch what happens when we change it to overlay. Now we get this glow, this kind of soft focus glow all over the place. I will create a mask, and I'll decide where I want to bring back by painting black. So let me just get my brush big again. I'm going to work at about 50%, and I just start painting. I'm going to bring the detail of the gun back in, but I pretty much want to let everything else do the glow. So her face and the gun. And let's take a look at that. I like that. And again, I can turn that on and off so you can see it. There was the before. I like the grunginess of it, but again, if you're trying to focus in on the face, by adding that glow everywhere else, it kind of softens the rest of the image and keeps the focus on the girl and on the gun. Kind of cool stuff. So one more time, I'm going to do a stack and show you one other way, or one other cool effect. Do another stack, and this time I'm going to run a Nick filter under Color Effects Pro. So let's let this run. Alright, so rather than the dynamic skin softener that we did before, we're going to go to Stylizing, and let's see what we got here. I want to do the Polaroid Transfer. Nick Color Effects comes in different flavors. There's the complete set, which is what you see here. There are also smaller sets that cost less money that have less of these filters available, and you can go on Nick's site and see what combination you need. What I want is the Polaroid Transfer, because it kind of gives me that funky edge as well, and it kind of creates this, I don't know how to describe it other than it's kind of, you know it when you look at it. And you can change all of these settings here. How much of the saturation, kind of gives it an old look. And how much of a smear do I want to have? You could see tear off, some of the front of the image gets torn off. Again, it all depends on the look. And if you want the border to be very tiny or very big, if you guys have ever seen that Polaroid Transfer done. I like how that's coming through, so I'm going to hit OK. And Nick will do its thing and apply that. You can get lost in this stuff. You will spend a little extra time in this stuff the first time you do it, but after you start to get the hang of it, you start to learn to know where to go, and then it becomes very quick. So pretty cool. I'm going to see what I remember. I want the face, and in this case the gun, to be the focus. So I'm going to borrow that mask I just created when we did the high pass a minute ago. Again, I'm holding down Option or Alt, dragging the mask into there, and what that had the effect of doing was it added the Polaroid Transfer around the rest of the image and let everything else start to come through. And that's where we are. Command 0 to fill the screen, and looks pretty cool. Again, for those of you that that joined late, yes, this is being recorded. For those of you that joined me for the first one, we'll have parts 1 and 2, and they'll be there waiting for you. The videos that we get recorded and get posted, you have sliders, you have kind of play controls. You can drag forward and back as much as you want. So if you want to bypass the beginning, or you want to run right to a spot where you really want to see something again, just drag the slider there and it'll pick up playing right there. It's really handy. So very cool stuff. And this Polaroid Transfer that you just saw, this is a NIC filter. It's not something available in Photoshop, unfortunately. But it's money well spent. Once you get the hang of this stuff, if you're doing portrait work as a professional, if you're selling your images and you produce something like this, let's see where we started. Here's where we started not that long ago, and look where we've ended up. A lot of different impact. I can even throw this on, the glow on top of it again, and it starts to look almost comic booky. Oh, I kind of like that. Let's see that. That's with both the Polaroid Transfer and the glow added on, and I kind of like how it's almost started to turn into a graphic novel look. So very cool. Okay, so let's be done with Katie here. And wow, it's 3:50. I got 10 minutes. Let's see. I got to do something else cool for you guys. Let's take a look at Rachel here, and I'm going to load both of these images. Okay, so my friend Rachel, and first thing I'm going to show you, again, retouch. I'm going to do your, if there's a major problem like something is grossly underexposed or overexposed, fix that first. If there is nothing like that, then start to move into the retouching, and again, we're going to do it on a layer. So I hit Command J. And yes, for the videos, for those of you that asked, we'll send you an email. We'll have all the links directly to the videos. Just be patient and give us 24 hours to make that happen. So I'm going to zoom in on her face, and I'm going to speed this up. So I'm going to use Dynamic Skin Softener again. I'm going to go into NIC, Color Effects, and let Dynamic Skin Softener do most of the work for me, not the Polaroid Transfer. So I click on Portrait, go to Dynamic Skin Softener, tell the software what her skin color is by clicking there, and I can zoom in, and I can just drag my slider left and right and see what it did. And look at that, one fell swoop, did a pretty good job. Now I took away a little bit too much detail here. See, I have these small details and medium details all turned way up. That will really obliterate them. So by bringing these down, it brings the small details back, and just does, yeah, so that's good. So let's click OK. Again, someday we'll do a complete NIC. Somebody asked, ooh, why did I load both images? Stay tuned. That's all part of the fun. All right, so let me back off here. Now I'm going to show you a color editing I do all the time. Now there's a little bit of color off in this, but I'm not sure what I want it to do. And one of the things I learned when I was an art director is sometimes you know there's a color wrong, but you just can't figure out what's wrong. So this is a technique that I do when I know something needs to be fixed, but I'm just not sure what it needs. Go to the adjustment layers and choose color balance. Now this is my personal way of doing this. Give it a try. I think you might like it. First, with midtones chosen, add lots of red, and then add lots of cyan. Now they're both going to look awful, but one of them is going to look less awful probably. Red looks pretty awful. Cyan, awful, but not as bad. So what that's telling me is this image needs some cyan. So I will bring that back down somewhere between 5 and 15. This seemed to need a lot of it, so I'm going to go to 15. Magenta green is rarely off. Typically the only time it ends off is if you had the wrong white balance set in your camera and you shot a JPEG. Say for example you had it set for tungsten and it was sunny out. That might cause a magenta green shift. Generally, normally no. So I skip that and then go to yellow blue. So lots of yellow, lots of blue. Blue looks a lot less worse. I'm going to add a little bit of blue there. Then I move on to highlights. Same process. Lots of red, lots of cyan. Now here's an example where they both look really awful. If they both look really awful, then that means they're in balance. Leave them alone. So I'll jump down to yellow, blue. In this case, blue looks less awful, so I'm going to add a little bit of blue. And then lastly, shadows. Same process. Lots of red, lots of cyan. Definitely needed more cyan. And then blue, lots of yellow. And a little bit of blue maybe. Okay. So by doing that process, you can see we just went from there, where it was a little too yellow, to there, which looks a little more neutral, a little more what I was after. All right, so next step. I want to darken this image up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is create a stack. Again, Alt Merge Visible. And I'm going to change the blending mode from normal to multiply. And that will darken up my image. Now it darkened it up too much, which is okay, because we're on a layer. And what I'm looking at are kind of the bricks in the background. I'm not really concerned about Rachel here because I'm going to mask her back in. I want to get these side things the way I want. That's kind of where I want it. So I'll now add a mask and bring up a black brush. And about 50% is good. And I'll just start painting over top of her. And I'm going to lighten up her face a little more later, so don't be concerned. All right, almost done with this. By the way, guys, I see I've got like officially 5 minutes left. You guys want to go a little late because I got a couple more things I want to show you. So let me know if you mind staying 5 extra minutes. Okay, so we will do that, because I want to finish this one off because this is some cool stuff. All right, so I've got my mask here. I can take a look. I can decide to maybe bring it back. Now again, I can do that by continuing to paint over this, or I can just do an adjustment right directly to the mask. I'm going to bring up levels and change the sliders so that that mask darkens up in there. Good, like that. Click on my icon again. So now we've brought Rachel back and the background has stayed dark. Now, somebody asked earlier, why did I bring up that other image? Let's go take a look. This was a nearby wall, and whenever I come across some kind of interesting texture, any wall, oh, some of you can't, all right, a couple of you got to go. So for those of you who have to go, the discount code, which we will put in the email follow-up, which all you guys will get, is simply JBrady, J-B-R-A-D-Y. Put that in the shopping cart in either Nick's website, nicksoftware.com, or Topaz Labs, and you will get 10% off your Topaz purchase and 15% off all your Nick stuff. So for those of you who have to leave, there we go. All right, so I've got my new image here. I want to do something cool with this. So I'm going to select all and copy it. Then I'm going to close it. And I'm not going to save it. What I'm going to do is paste it into this image. So now it's sitting over top of this image. You can say I turn this on and off. You might be saying, well, why? Why did I do that? Whenever I'm doing portraits, and that's what this shoot was for, Rachel's high school senior, senior portraits often look really cool with a little bit of grunge if you can add it. I'll shoot something interesting, a graffitied wall, some kind of rocks or stones, or some peeling paint or some rust or something, put it over top and then change the blending mode to overlay and watch what happens to the image. Now you might be thinking that's terrible, it's over her face, but don't worry. What I really wanted to do was I wanted to just show up on the background. I also wanted it to show up on her dress, but I don't want it to show up on her skin. So what I'm going to do is borrow the mask we used earlier on this multiply layer, put it on there, and look what happened all of a sudden. She's back, but look what happened to the background. Kind of a cool effect. See that? Now, if there's a little bit of overlap on her arms because this mask is not 100%, I can bring up my brush, put black in the foreground again, and this time I'll paint it about 80%. Just go to my mask and bring the skin back. Now conversely, I actually think this might look really cool showing through the dress. So I'm going to paint with white back on the mask that's over top of the dress. Let's see what happens here. Oh, I like what that's doing. That's kind of cool. It's letting some of the graffiti actually show through the dress. So let's see where we are. Pretty cool. And again, we started here. And now we are here. Which portrait do you think she likes better? All right, last thing I'm probably going to want to do to this image. Let me just clean up this mask a little bit. Again, a little smaller brush. Oops, I got my white in the foreground. And I forgot to turn on my mask. There we go. Let's bring her skin back. Okay. Now the last thing I want to do is her face was in a little bit too much shadow, and I want to lighten it up. I want to kind of make you look at her eyes a little bit more. So I'm going to create a burn dodge layer by creating a new layer and changing it to overlay like we did earlier. And I'm going to bring up my brush. I'm going to zoom in on her face. I want to lighten up her eyes a little bit. Yes, I would probably do a little more blemish retouching and that kind of thing for this image, but we're running out of time, so I want to show you some new stuff. So I get my brush, and again, when I'm burning and dodging, I typically work at about 10%. Put white in the foreground, and I'm just going to lighten up around her eyes a bit. And it's looking kind of subtle right now, but wait till you see when we back off. Also, I'm going to lighten her teeth this way. I'm just going to bring the brush in, zoom in at way beyond 100%, and just lighten the teeth a smidge. Again, if you get teeth that are overly white, they start to look pretty bad. I could also make them completely neutral and not have any yellow in them at all, and that looks really weird. But you want to see that, right? Okay, we'll do that in a second. Okay, and I'm going to add some highlights to her hair. On the same thing, I'll go about 20% to do that, just to bring out some of the lines in her hair. And you see here up on the top, we've got some of that graffiti showing in through her hair. I can decide if I want that or not. Let me go ahead and mask that back out. Let's go to 100% and get rid of the blue in her hair, although she might like it. All right, so just that little simple bit of burning and dodging we did around her eyes. Watch what happens when I turn it on and off. See the difference? So just doing that opened up her eyes for this particular image. And there we go. So again, we went from here to here fairly quickly. Pretty cool stuff. All right, so let's be done with Rachel, and let's finish up one more. What did I want to show you? Let's take this one. I'm going to show you a couple other cool things in Photoshop, and then we got to run. Then we got to be finished. So here we've got an image. This was actually shot in the slot canyons, and first thing I need to do is I had cropped this because, according to the rule of thirds, I did kind of want to have him centered on this upper right point, but when I did that, I ran out of image over there. So to fix that, what I'm going to do, there's a couple ways to do that. Now, if you've got CS5, you can simply select the white area, go over a little bit, and select Image, Fill, ContentAware. And what this does, it'll just calculate and chug away, and it will try to figure out, well, if there was image over there, what should it be? Let me go ahead and calculate it out and fill it in, and let's see what it comes up with. And pretty good job, huh? However, oops, you don't all have CS5, and sometimes it's not perfect. So let me show you one other way to do this. That is in CS4. Select an area that kind of goes right up to the area that's missing. Select as much as you can without hitting a person, and select ContentAware Scale, which does exist in CS4, and then drag to fill the area. And that does a nice job as well. So again, I want to add some shape into the photograph. It's a little too light on the side. I want to make him more the focus. So new layer. Change it to overlay, black in the foreground, get a nice big brush, I'm going to paint at 20% and just kind of start bringing the area outside of him on either side a little darker. Even down around his legs. And now I'm going to go back to 10% so I can get a little closer to his head. And again, just that fast, look what we've got. We went from there to there. Now we've got more of a focus on him. Now I'm going to bring in another image, another layer rather, which was some stones. Let me show that to you as a normal layer. I took an image of stones. Let me fill this mask with white so you can see. I copied an image of stones in here, and I bring the saturation down a bit. Again, when you find something interesting, take a picture of it. I took a picture of these stones and changed it to overlay, and this is what I got. Now, this is a very scalable thing because it's an abstract, so I'll fill the image with it. And I'm going to bring the opacity down, and I'm going to mask him back in. So I bring up my brush, and I'm going to paint at 80%. Whoops, paint it on the image instead of the mask, and that's your first clue when the image starts getting darker. Now I'm just going to bring his face and skin back in. I actually kind of like the stones showing through the guitar. That's kind of cool. Actually kind of a cool graphic for a guitar. And yes, if you just pick that up, that's a way you can design stuff non-destructively. Let's zoom in. See, that's kind of cool how the stones have shown through on the guitar there as well. And one last effect. I'm going to do a color change to this. And we're going to really make some kind of dramatic statement here. So I'm going to add a hue saturation layer. And I'm going to completely change it. Go to let's see, let's try like this kind of blue. Now it looks freaky. Bear with me. Stay with me here. I'm going to go into my mask and I'm going to bring up the gradient tool. And I have black in the foreground and white in the background. So anywhere that's black, this gradient is going to be, or this hue saturation is going to be hidden. Anywhere that's white, it'll show through. So I don't want the blue to start happening until it's about midway of his body. So I'm going to click here and then start to drag up to the corner and see what I get. So now I have kind of a half and half. There's the mask I just created. And what I decide I want to do is adjust the mask a bit. So with my mask selected, I'm going to bring his skin back here, but I'm going to allow some of the blue to show through down here by painting through here. And then lastly, I'm going to add another burn and dodge layer by changing it to overlay, and I'm going to darken that background up. Get a big brush, I'm going to work at 20%. Really, I'm really after just darkening this up. And then I'm going to change the hue saturation layer's opacity down a little bit to lessen the effect. And maybe bring a little of the stone back, just to kind of add a little bit of interest to the image. And let's take a look and see what we got. So again, we went from here. Whoops, I had some extra layers there. Actually, I kind of like that. To there. That's kind of cool. So a real interesting effect. Again, just a couple of minutes, but it makes for a very interesting portrait. So I am just completely out of time. I appreciate you guys keeping with me, but I really like that image. Actually, I'm going to save that one. I like where it is. Yeah, somebody mentioned I really raised havoc with the slot canyons. Yes, I did. I have all kinds of images of the slot canyons shot normally, so it's nice to have something interesting every once in a while. So we're out of time. Thank you, everybody, for spending time with me today. Hope to see you online again soon. Bye-bye.